Greetings once again, fighting game fans. We find ourselves again with Koihime Enbu. In this particular video, we are going to take an in-depth look into the game's system mechanics. I will refer a couple of times to outside sources, of which I will link in the description below. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is movement. Although it is very simple, it is important to know what you can and cannot do. You can walk forward, you can walk back, you can dash forward with 2 forwards, you can dash back with 2 backs. You can crouch, and you have a single jump, up, forward, and back. There are no double jumps, no air back dash, no air forward dash, and no super jumps. That is everything. Keep in mind, though, that your back dash has a little bit of invincibility, so it can save you in a pinch. I want to make a quick point about this game's input buffer. It is very generous, and that sounds like a good thing, and it is, I guess, but it can also be a bad thing. And the reason is, if you're trying to do a series of quick actions, it can confuse inputs. Such as, if I want to run up and fireball the opponent, not sure why you'd do that, but you can, except you get a dragon punch instead. So this is just one example of confusion that can happen, so be very careful about how you're inputting your attacks. The next thing I want to talk about is meter. On the bottom of the screen you can see that we have 4 blocks, each representing 25% of the overall meter. 3 of these are filled in, but 1 is not. It is important to note that you can carry the meter that you don't use in between rounds. So if you don't use it, you have a chance to use it again still in the next round. So as to why there's a missing block, I can fill that in. Whoever lands the first hit in a round gets a full block of meter, which is pretty significant. Now if you'll watch on the bottom as I hit the opponent, that brick will fill in. Boom, full meter. No problem. You get the first hit, you get that full 25% block. What can you do with that block? Well, let's find out. The first thing you can do with meter is use an EX attack. Now every special has an EX version, so everyone has access to this. You can also use assists, which also take 1 meter. You can also use Ogi attacks, which take 3 meter. As you can see, that's quite a powerful attack, and it is invincible on startup. You can also perform a Hyogi attack, which uses the entire meter, all 4 blocks, but it has a condition that must be met first. This does a tremendous amount of damage, as well as taking your entire meter. Moving right into offense, we start with the very basic buttons. We have a 4-button system. We have a weak attack, we have a medium attack, and we have a strong attack. And we also have a button dedicated to throws. Nothing too difficult. I want to make a special note about projectiles, and the fact that they can be cut. So if you're spamming projectiles, your opponent can just slash through them, just like this. Now, as to what attacks will cut projectiles, that depends on characters and what kind of attacks they have. And I have a master list of all that information that I will link in the description. Also, it depends a little bit on timing too. As you saw earlier, I was hit by a projectile I should have been able to cut. And that can happen. You also notice that A and B attack won't cut projectiles. And that EX attack there is not cuttable at all. See, I can cut that. I can cut that too. But that one, despite my bad timing, cannot be cut. Oh geez, I'm real bad at this. But you can also go right through your opponent's fireballs too with your own EX. Or you can cancel their level 2 fireball with your own level 2 fireball. See right there, I was unable to cut that projectile because it was an EX level 2. Anyways, moving on. I also want to mention that if at any point you manage to hit your opponent in the air, it will knock them down. It doesn't matter what you use to hit them. Could be an A attack, could be a B attack, could be a C attack, could be a B attack on the ground. It could even be an A attack on the ground. It will knock them down. Now, whether or not your opponent can recover from this depends on the attack that hit them. So, don't worry too much about that right now. We will cover that a bit more in a little bit. Another thing I really want to mention is that some attacks are airborne despite them being launched from the ground. Now, we know that Kanyu's 2C is a low. It also does a lot of damage. But through testing, we also know that 6Bs in this game all have some sort of quote-unquote airborne property, whether or not they look like it. They are all immune to lows. So I should be able to, theoretically, punish that 2C. Let's see if we can. No problem. Absolutely easy. I did it my first try. Every 6B in the game has this property. So if your opponent likes to wake up and jab low or something, you know that you can easily punish that. Easily. It makes 6Bs in this game especially dangerous. So keep that in mind. Moving on to counter hits. A counter hit is obtained when you strike your opponent in the startup of their own attack. So if they're launching an attack with a lot of startup and you use something much faster, you will probably cause a counter hit. And what do these counter hits do for you? Well, they do a couple of things. For the first hit landed in a series, they give 20% additional damage. That's flat, and it only counts on the first hit. So if you do a long combo, it doesn't get plus 20% damage the whole way. It's only the first hit. The other special property is that it gives a little bit of additional hit stun. And I can show this, which I will in a moment, but you may be able to link attacks together that you might not be able to normally. And another thing to mention is that sometimes between a normal and a counter hit, the properties of an attack will change. Kanyu's 2C, which we demonstrated just a moment ago, knocks down on a counter hit. On a normal hit, it doesn't knock down, it just does a boatload of damage. So, there are a lot of attacks that have some kind of property change in that way. So, feel free to test them out. They are not all listed in my master document. It's not 100%, but there's a lot of stuff there. So, feel free to do a lot of testing on your own and find out what changes and how it changes. Fortunately, we can test both of these properties out at the same time, more or less. Now, 2B is special cancelable on Kanyu, so we can link directly into a fireball. Now, if we do 2B into a B fireball, we cannot hit them. We also note that this does 900 damage flat. So, at this range, we cannot link that fireball to a combo from a 2B starter. Doesn't work. So let's try a counter hit. Now with a counter hit, we knew it did 900 damage, 2B, I mean. Now it does 1080. So we know it does 180 more damage. 20%, right? Okay, well what about the hit stun? So I wasn't able to link it before, but let's see if we can now. Yep, we sure can. 2-hit combo. This proves we get a little bit of extra hit stun. Also, as far as the 2C, knockdown. Boom. Alright, moving on to fatal counters. Fatal counters, or Hogekis, are major upgrades to regular counters, and you will know immediately when you hear a gong sound that you have completely incapacitated your opponent. They are now in a semi-permanent juggle state and are at your mercy. In this state, several attacks gain new properties such as wall bounce and ground bounce. Hogeki combos are now able to be performed, which last until a wall bounce, a ground bounce, and a launcher have all been exhausted, or the combo has been dropped. Hyogis are also now usable, which was the 4-bar special attack that we saw earlier. And outside of 3Bs, which launch on Fatal, any other attack that does a fatal, even if taken in the air, will drop the opponent right in front of you. Now, what does a fatal counter combo look like? Let's take a look. If you want to see the importance of a fatal counter and what kind of damage can be caused with one, just observe. That was one combo and it did a ton of damage. This is possible across the entire cast. So if you get a fatal counter combo going, you will probably end the round, regardless if you even get to the Hyogi state. Most of the time, you won't even have full meter, but you'll still dish out an absolute absurd amount of damage. And your opponent just has to watch you do it because they know they messed up. Moving on. I want to talk about cross-ups too, because it looks like, based on this, that you can cross up your opponent. And I thought that for a while too. However, I eventually caught on. If you're blocking, actually, away from your opponent when they leave the ground, it doesn't matter if they cross you up or not. You'll still block them. I'll demonstrate. See, look. You notice that the block direction looks wrong, but you still block it. This proves that cross-ups cannot happen as long as you are blocking high. So, does this mean you shouldn't do them? Absolutely not. You should still go for them. Why? You might catch your opponent putting in buttons, being sloppy. You might also be able to land and continue some kind of pressure mix-up. So, there's no reason not to go for them. It also helps you get out of the corner. So, if you know you can do it, give it a shot. We should talk about throws, so let's do that. Throws cannot be performed on an opponent who is in hit stun or block stun. Only neutral states. You can also throw away by holding back and change the direction you throw your opponent. This also pertains to command grabs. They follow the exact same rules. You also cannot follow up with a downed opponent or with an opponent who has been thrown. Now, there is one caveat to where you can throw an opponent in hit stun, and that is only during your fatal or Hogeki state. See, here we can throw our opponent. That is the only time. I don't know why you would do that. It completely ruins the combo. But you can. If you just want to go for a quick kill, keep it in mind. Moving on. There's not a lot to talk about in regards to assists, as there are only a handful of them, and the effects vary, but they more or less all do the same thing. So choose wisely. If you want to know the list of effects, it will be linked in the document that I will link in the description. So feel free to check there for a list of all the information. So, choose wisely. I want to make a special mention about taunts. In this game, they actually have a hitbox. And they can counter hit. They really don't seem to have much of a use outside of fun and gimmicks, but I just thought it was interesting, so I included it. Moving on to defense. Defense in Koihime Enbu is not much different from many other fighting games. You have 3 zones, low, mid, and high, and the majority, overwhelmingly so, of air-to-ground attacks hit overhead. While there are exceptions, you should always block high against an aerial opponent. The chance that it won't be an overhead is very low. Something to be very cautious about while blocking is Guard Crush. Now, Ryofu has 2 attacks at Guard Crush, but they both have conditions. The opponent has to be crouching. If the opponent is standing, neither of these attacks will Guard Crush. And that actually works against normal blocking behavior because most people want to block low because most attacks hit low or mid. So that actually is a bit of a change up. You have to change your behavior a little bit in these matchups. Keep that in mind. Some attacks will absolutely guard crush you standing though. Make sure you know your matchup and know what attacks can guard crush, how they can guard crush, and act accordingly. Moving on. The last thing I want to talk about defensively is chip. And yes, it is in the game, but it only happens on special attacks and pretty much anything that costs meter. As you can see, this doesn't cost any chip. And despite how devastating that attack is, it doesn't cause any chip either. However, these attacks, while guard crushing even, cause chip. So does... oh, bad example. That causes chip. We also have the Yogi attack. That causes quite a bit of chip. So anything that costs meter or is a special attack pretty much will cause chip. Can this kill you? It absolutely can. So when you're at low life, you want to be very careful about what you block and what you try to counter. Now, if your opponent sees that you're on low life, they will probably, if their character is able, try and spam projectiles at you to chip you to death. I have done this before. It works surprisingly well. Now, you remember earlier when I said some attacks can cut projectiles? Well, this is one of those times you'd want to use that. Unfortunately, if your opponent knows that and they have a little bit of meter, they can just chuck an EX fireball at you and kill you that way. So you have to be very careful on how you balance it and try to avoid chip. Most of the time, it's not a big deal. The chances of you getting killed by it are pretty low, but those situations do happen, so make sure you pay very, very close attention to your life. Moving on, recovery. The last thing I want to talk about in this game, as far as major mechanics go, is recovery. Now, you may not think this is a very important mechanic, but in this game it kind of can be. And in this game, if you get hit in the air like I demonstrated earlier, you will get knocked down. However, most attacks can be recovered. So if you get hit with most things, you can recover in the air and on the ground. To recover on the ground, you have to press the button as soon as you contact it. If you wait too long, you have to recover normally. In the air, you can also follow up an aerial recovery with an attack of your own, and there are implications to why you would or would not want to do this, or if you'd even want to recover at all in the air versus the ground, or maybe not recover at all. So let's check this out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, pretty much anything that hits your opponent in the air will knock them down. However, you can recover from most of these. Do keep in mind that you can be hit after you recover in the air. And now ground recovery. Also keep in mind that you can only take neutral and not side to side. So what about that air attack recovery option? Well, let's check it out. Wow, you get an attack after you recover. Oh, it seems pretty great too, because it hits the opponent. So why wouldn't you use this option? Well, it has some flaws. If your opponent knows you're going to do it, or suspects you're going to do it, they can take advantage of it with a fatal counter. Maybe not a fatal counter, but they can still hit you. Depending on how you play, if you're predictable, your opponent can take advantage of that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have the option to not recover, or wait until you hit the ground to recover. Now, if you wait until the ground, you recover right away and you can defend yourself pretty quickly. However, if you choose not to recover, if your opponent is also playing predictably and goes for some kind of meaty attack, then you throw off their timing a little bit and get into their head. It pays to mix up your playstyle quite a bit. Don't be predictable. Now let's check out non-recovery. I mentioned non-recovery, and why might you want to use something like this? Well, it's not the option I recommend really, but it does have some benefits. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot follow up with a downed opponent. You are totally invincible until you get up. So, why would you want to care about that? Well, as I mentioned just a bit ago, if your opponent really goes for obvious attacks after knockdowns or other situations like that, you can take advantage of that by throwing your timing off a little bit. So, that's pretty much the only reason you would want to maybe not recover. Most of the time you probably won't want to try to recover, but there are times where you might want to consider not doing it. Moving on to our very last section. The last little bit I want to talk about are things that can't be recovered. And while these usually involve metered attacks, that's not always the case. Start with an EXDP here, no recovery. EX Kunai, no recovery. Throw, no recovery. Command throw, again, no recovery. What about assists? Well, assists use meter, why didn't that knock down? Well, in most cases they do. This is the only one that doesn't. This can be followed up with your own attacks, however, or maybe used for a mix-up, some kind of throw, high-low, something. Be creative. Show some initiative. Anyways, if you hit them in the air with any of those projectiles, it will cause a hard knockdown, unrecoverable situation. So what else causes these unrecoverable situations? We have the 3C. 3C on normal hit, universally across the cast, will knock down the opponent, and they can't recover from it. Obviously on counter hit, that is a fatal counter, and is preferable, but just to show the property changes. Also, you notice the dummy recovers here. If it were set on air recovery on a normal hit, the opponent would be able to recover there, in the air. However, on a counter hit, if I hit the opponent on the ground, they would still only be able to recover on the ground. Why is that? Well, we learned earlier that counter hits add an additional bit of hit stun, and that extra hit stun pushes them outside the window for air recovery, so they're only able to recover on the ground. Knowing certain things like that can go a long way in a matchup. Again, show some initiative, do some testing, and learn the ins and outs of your character, and you'll be a beast. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this video was helpful. Once again, I will provide links to all materials referenced in the video in the description below. Also, if any corrections need to be made, they will be posted there as well. Peace.